Hey. Hi. Across my illustrious career collecting pulp paperbacks from thrift stores, I've never read a book as fast as I did this book by Robert R. McCammon. Books with bizarre covers and mysterious back cover text will sit on my shelf for months or years before I actually tackle them, because I have so many other books I'm meant to be reading first. But Bethany Sin was irresistible. The cover features skinned horses with laser eyes superimposed on a cross, while the back text suggests a story about misandrist women who might be demonic equine shapeshifters. The blurb itself is spectacular and just worth a read, so I'm just gonna go. Even God has fled from Bethany Sin. When Evan Reed brought his wife and small daughter to Bethany Sin, it seemed the perfect setting. A small village, far from the noise and pollution of the city, it was quaint and very peaceful. Too peaceful. There were no sounds at all, almost as if the night had been frightened into silence. Then Evan noticed there were very few men in the village, and that those he knew of were crippled, and sometimes he thought he heard the sound of horses galloping in the dead of night. Soon he would know the superhuman secret that kept the village alive, and he would watch in horror as Kay and Lori underwent a hideous transformation right before his eyes. He would know the terror that happened at night, and only to men, in Bethany's Sin, the place where no man walks the streets after nightfall. The power that this book possesses as an object is palpable. I needed answers. I needed to know what Bethany had done. The back cover, as with most pulp, is an exaggeration bordering on a lie, but damn it if it isn't a compelling one. The constant emphasis on men, to the degree that it is bolded once in the blurb, when I went really like men, that's because it was bolded. A flourish I have never seen before on a book blurb. And it kills me. As much as the story is about mysterious demonic horse transformation, the back cover suggests the true horror is the idea of a man feeling unsafe at night. While the book is actually better about gender than you would expect, much of the horror is rooted in this shocking reversal of gender roles. I mean, if a man being a victim is shocking, then what is a woman victim? Routine, I suppose, tragic and upsetting, but not horror. When I began reading, though, the first thing I noticed about Bethany Sin was very unusual. I liked it. And as I read the rest of the book, I never stopped liking it. My specialty is bad books, but that has always been a term requiring nuance and context. Is this a good book? Very debatable. Is this a good pulp horror from the 80s about a town of evil women? Yes. It is what it is. It's competently written and successful at what it sets out to do. There are moments of good prose, mild subtlety, suspense, and even engaging characterization. I would not suggest reading it unless you really are intrigued and know what to expect from a 1980s pulp horror. And even then, it's still a pretty weak recommendation, because Bethany Sin has a dark secret, even stranger than the idea that it's kinda alright. It's not that interesting. I wouldn't call it dull. Stay with me, but there is nothing bombastic about Bethany and her sin. There's no over-the-top moments of nonsense or insanity that many of its worst-written peers feature. Like, many years ago, I read a book called The Immortals, which was very similar looking and feeling to this. And part of The Immortals, at one point, a man receives as a gift a doll which is made out of human skin that has to be moisturized every day or the skin will shrivel up, and that is never addressed, never explained, never comes up in any particular way. That's the kind of weird stuff that I expect from a book like this, and there's just none of that in Bethany Sin in comparison. The gist of the plot is revealed in the prologue, and from there everything develops as you'd expect. Bethany Sin was never going to live up to its cover, but the reality is a bit of a disappointment, in a mundanely enjoyable sense. I mean, still, stay with me and watch this, but, you know, there's plenty of fun to have along the way. It is also worth noting, as we are going to head in here, that there's a bit of a content warning for some ableism. There's quite a bit of ableism in this book, and we're going to discuss that, including reading some bits of it, and also a mention of sexual assault. So, Bethany's Sin, or Bethany's Sin, It begins in 1970, 10 years before the plot actually begins. An unnamed woman archaeologist arrives at a dig site in Turkey. A hole has been found in a ruin that is being excavated, and she ignores all of the men warning her that it isn't safe to enter. Like, God forbid women do anything. She crawls forward into this dangerous tunnel, scraping her skin raw as the hole narrows, prying herself through, kicking rocks out of the way. She's just so determined until she emerges into a chamber full of statues and bones. A strange energy overwhelms her in front of one of the statues, causing her to collapse, and then she emerges from the chamber seemingly possessed. Almost everything key to the plot is set up in this first chapter. We haven't seen the town of Bethany Sin yet, but you can immediately guess that the dark force that haunts it is probably tied to that statue, and that this unnamed woman is Bethany, and that in 10 years, since she moved to Suburbia and she founded a town, and all of that is true. In fact, there's enough hints in the prologue that you could probably quite accurately guess a lot more of the plot just from that. Then we have a second prologue. This one is set in 1975, and it establishes our lead, Evan Reed, as he's held captive during the Vietnam War and tortured by a woman who's using a spider. Once more, this chapter serves as setup for Evan's character and storyline for the rest of the book, as well as many, many spider mentions. Anytime Evan is unsettled, he refers to it in spider metaphors. It gets rather repetitive, but my favorite example of this is near the end of the book. So, behind him lay Bethany Sin, an evil pregnant spider in the center of her web. Page 303. The hyphen here is between evil and pregnant, and by putting the hyphen between evil and pregnant, it implies that it is not the spider who is evil, but the pregnancy. Bethany Sin was like a spider, having a Rosemary's Baby experience in the center of her web. The rest of the book takes place over 3 months in 1980. Evan left the army with a Purple Heart and suffers intense insomnia and PTSD. It's been difficult for him to adapt after the war, and he works as a semi-employed writer of articles and short stories. His wife is doing her master's in teaching mathematics and has gotten a job tutoring at a local college. They have a 6-year-old daughter, Lori, as well. They've had to move a lot, especially after an unspoken recent incident involving Evan. And Bethany Sin is the perfect place for a fresh start. Let it go, he told himself. Let it go, because that part of our lives is finally over. It's going to be good now, here in Bethany Sin. Everything is as it should be. I'll make it good. Page 35. The Pennsylvanian town was founded only 10 years ago. It's a short distance from several larger towns, but mostly isolated by forests. The population is only 811 people, and despite the very bizarre name, the town has flourished in the last decade. There are at least 4 social clubs, as well as a florist, a craft store, a coffee shop, a bookstore, a restaurant, a clinic, a library, an elementary school, and a history museum, which is an incredible small town success story. Evan and Kay settle into their picturesque new home. The first hint something is amiss is when Evan feels a chill run down his neck. As Evan, he's had visions of the future his entire life. Yes, we just have a psychic character in this book. While all his visions have come true, Kay thinks that Evan's own anxieties were the cause. For example, he once dreamed of them dying in a collision with a red truck. And so later, when there was a red truck coming near them, Kay assumes he panicked at the sight, leading to a near miss, rather than him having that be the vision of the future, and only with his panic did he avoid getting hit by the car. You can see that, and it's great to see a man get dismissed as hysterical for once. And while there is some room for interpretation that Kay is correct and Evan is indeed, just having anxieties, he is actually just psychic. He had a vision of his brother's death before it happens, and he blames himself for not preventing it, and he takes all of his visions of the future seriously, but he downplays them to Kay to prevent her from worrying. The chill down Evan's neck as he spots a neighbor on the porch across from him is a supernatural warning, but the scene without that context reads differently, especially as the explicit reveal that he's psychic comes a chapter later. Let's go. The figure, wearing shadow robes, did not move. Evan couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. His eyes slid toward the street to the name on the mailbox, DeMargian. He started to put the suitcases down and stepped toward the DeMargian house, but suddenly the figure moved, turning noiselessly in its chair. As Evan watched, the entire chair swiveled and began to glide smoothly forward. Then the figure vanished within the house, and there was the noise of a door closing quietly. He stood for a moment, still gripping the suitcases, staring at that front porch. It hadn't been an ordinary piece of porch furniture that the figure had been sitting in. It had been a wheelchair. "Jesus H. Christ!" Evan said under his breath. He shook his head and turned back for his own doorway. Page 36. There are two disabled characters in this book, and both of these prompt these really over-the-top reactions from Evan. He's not technically being ableist when he reacts to them with horror, because his psychic sense is in fact trying to warn him that these men are disabled because of evil ghosts. Here's his reaction to another man. He went around to the back of the car to get a bag, and suddenly shivered because he realized what had disturbed him about that shadow. When it had turned toward the window, with the light streaming from behind, Evan had seen that the figure was missing its left arm. He didn't know why, but that made his nerves tingle as if an ice cube had been dropped down his back. Page 87. The ableism in this book is strange, is what I'm saying. Most of the scenes it comes up are accidentally near comical due to Evan's just exaggerated responses. At one point, Evan says he has no problem with amputees, being a veteran, but in another scene he spends a very long time fixated on his wheelchair-using neighbor, imagining he requires help to dress himself, and speculating with terror how emasculating this would be. How if he needed one himself, he'd be half a man. Like, it sounds like Evan does have quite a few issues with amputees, actually, and it's a theme we'll return to. While Evan and Kay's perspectives take up most of the book, there are two other viewpoints. The sheriff, Orrin Weisinger, I'm gonna say, and a drifter named Neely Ames. Neely comes looking for work, and Weisinger sets him up with a boarding house, city wage, and near-endless tasks across town. For all the hype on the back cover of this being a town of scared, disabled men, these additional male leads are neither, and they both go out at night without fear. Weisinger is an asshole who holds tight to his position of power despite being aware of the true horrors of Bethany Sin, while Neely is a regular enough guy who needs money. They're fine characters, they're functional to the plot, and they add a bit of action in between the slower main storyline, but it's definitely a shame that they're not better rooted to the premise. You could slot these guys in as is into any thriller without issue. But yeah, Evan and Kay peacefully begin their new life in Bethany Sin. A book like this really makes me anticipate stupid cliffhangers and ridiculous twists, like a neighbor who stares at them menacingly from their backyard, a dog being poisoned, their child coming home from school saying something very unnerving. And this doesn't happen in Bethany Sin. Evan has occasional dreams of bad vibes, but he tries to push those aside. Evan notices one of their neighbors hasn't been home and sees Neely mowing the house's lawn. It turns out everyone thinks the neighbor must be on a long vacation or just left town. It's a bit weird, but there's just no other answer Evan and Neely can think of, and life moves on. The community seems nice. Kay settles into her new job, and Evan looks for writing inspiration. He figures he could write an article about Bethany Sin for a small Pennsylvanian magazine, and he starts asking a question that I'm sure everyone has been asking for 80 pages. I certainly was. Isn't Bethany Sin like a really weird town name? Here he is talking to Kay about the matter. Besides, he said, looking back at her, wouldn't you be interested in finding out what the sin was? The sin? What sin? Whatever Bethany Sin was. You have to admit it's unusual and an intriguing name for a village. I'd like to find the meaning behind it. She smiled. Maybe it has no meaning. Why should it? Why shouldn't it? Most towns and cities are named after something specific, an event, a person, a season, whatever. Take the name Bethany. A person's name? First name or last name? I'd like to find out. Page 83. A point Evan never makes, but I'd like to, is that it's especially a strange town name for something this town is only a decade old. There are countless absurd town names in the United States, but Bethany Sin is especially dark and was founded in 1970. Like, as I dunk on the town name, I do have to confess I did grow up within the New England Satan Kingdom triangle, as in there are places called Satan's Kingdom in Vermont, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. However, none of them are proper towns, none of them were founded in the last decade, and all of them elicit some level of curiosity when brought up in conversation. Satan's Kingdom is a weird name. Bethany Sin is a weird name. For some reason, no one in this book thinks so, and I find that both funny and befuddling. Everyone Evan interviews on the subject reacts as if he's asking them about a town named Springfield. Bethany Sin just screwed his diamond blue eyes up in thought and grunted. No, I don't guess I've ever really sat down and done much thinking about it. Just seems like a name to me. Page 146. Evan's investigations lead him to the library. Here he spots a framed etching on the wall of a naked woman carrying a bow and surrounded by wolves. He doesn't recognize who it depicts, and the librarian explains. It's the Greek goddess Artemis, and the piece was a donation by the town's mayor, Dr. Catherine Drago. Neither Evan nor the librarian knows anything further about Artemis, but this dose of exposition is enough to solve the entire book before we've hit the halfway mark. Artemis is, after all, a goddess of the hunt who had little tolerance for men. Catherine Drago is a wealthy archaeologist and founder of the Historical Society, a building which gives Evan the chills every time he thinks of it. It is a small and accurate assumption that Catherine is Bethany, and that the danger that befalls men is related to the hunters of Artemis. Despite how signposted the plot is, I still enjoyed watching it develop, but I can imagine others finding these early revelations frustrating. Like, it'll be a long time before Evan learns any part of the truth. Evan and Kay are invited to dinner at the DeMargian house. Evan spends most of the time staring at Mr. DeMargian. Here the excuse of Evan being weird around disabled people due to his psychic sense really falls away, as he does spend a full page speculating about the man's disability. There is something to be said about Evan's PTSD relating to his fears around disability, how perhaps his judgmental anxiety is a reflection of his fears of being damaged psychologically by the war, how much further it might have gone, and his fears of helplessness. This is somewhat plausible, but it's also very charitable. Evan's PTSD is well written, but if it's meant to narratively link to his views on disability, it isn't executed well enough to make the following worth it. And yeah, let me read this. It's pretty bad. The knot of the tie was awry, and a button on the shirt unfastened, leaving Evan with the impression that perhaps the man had allowed himself to be dressed like some sort of department store mannequin. A picture of Mrs. DeMargian dressing her husband flashed through Evan's mind like a streak of a meteor, struggling with the pants on his paralyzed legs, pulling them up and belting them around his paralyzed waist. God, how terrible that would be, Evan thought. For a brief instant he imagined Kay dressing him, and he in the place of Harris DeMargian. Unable to walk or run, unable to do a multitude of things that Evan took for granted, unable to make love. Half a man. Page 90. I cannot tell if this is a character choice or a reflection of the author's biases, and in many cases, stuff like this is a mix of both. Evan is projecting his own fears of helplessness onto a man he does not know, equating his disability with assumed suffering. Of course, in this narrative, Mr. DeMargian is suffering. He is a victim, as we will later learn, not paralyzed by a car accident, but by the cult of evil women who run this town. Later it is treated as a shock reveal that he isn't actually paralyzed, but an amputee. Both of his legs haven't been cut off above the knee. Evan's psychic sense something off is fully justified in text, and the despair that he imagines in Mr. DeMargian's eyes is real. But regardless of how his unsettlement is narratively justified, the rest of his speculation just isn't. It echoes a perspective on disability which has persisted into the modern day. And let me just go ahead and address this. A life where you need assistance to get dressed is not a life of despair, it's a life millions of people live, and it means that it might take you a little longer to get ready in the morning. Happiness and well-being does not rely on you having working legs. For every activity, like jogging, that requires mobility, there are 100 other things to find joy in. Some people may be unable to have traditional sex due to their disability, but that doesn't mean they can't have sex at all. And even then, once more, the inability to participate in certain activities does not equate to some hollow, false life. A person in a wheelchair is not half a human. They are a person in a wheelchair. Despite Evan's uncomfortable staring, the dinner with the DeMargians goes well. Elsewhere, Neely Ames's night does not. There's a few chapters and scenes in the book which follow new characters who are introduced and promptly killed, just adding a splash of gore and horror in between the more mundane life of our leads. And it's good gore and horror. Like, it's very bloody and over the top in a lot of ways, but very enjoyable. It's exactly what you want from a book like this. Neely has been drinking in a nearby town, and as he drives back to the boarding house in Bethany Sin, he has a face-to-face encounter with the true threat that haunts the sleepy town. Women on horseback, wielding huge axes. The women ride bareback on their black horses, wearing thin robes and resembling ethereal wraiths more than people. Their eyes are described as glowing a furnace blue-white with expressions of pure hatred. We never see these hunting women speak, and they appear to have no goal other than to hunt down and dismember any man they can find on the night of a full moon. Neely is attacked by a herd of them, who cause him to crash and attempt to break into his car with their axes. He's able to drive away, though, and only able to believe he wasn't hallucinating because of these huge dents left over from, again, the giant axes. When he tells Sheriff Wisinger about it the next day, the sheriff dismisses him. It's clear, though, that the sheriff knows more than he's letting on, however, and soon he's leafing through his scrapbook of unsolved murders, all of them men who were brutally dismembered within a small radius of Bethany Sin. As much as Wisinger is actually helping cover up a lot of these crimes, it's still wild how many people have been murdered in the same brutal way with axes in a small radius, and for nobody to have picked up on this yet. Back in Suburbia, Kay meets Catherine Drago at her job and is invited to a party at her mansion. That night, she has a vivid dream in which she is a warrior battling an army of men, with the feeling of hate lingering as she wakes up. These dreams continue for the rest of the book, and they provide us with a collection of names which are meant to be ancient Greek warrior women. However, it is clear the author did next to no research on the subject. So here's a list of names. Olivia Bray, Collii, Demusa, Antibrae, Demondai the Dark, Antigatha, Sibella, Bremusa. Of them, only Bremusa is a real appropriate name, while Sibella comes pretty close. The others are, to the best of my knowledge, a mix of Latin and Greek gibberish. Evan and Kay head to Catherine's party, and we get a little detail that I find just amusing in the lead-up. Evan had bought a new tie to go with his navy blue blazer, gray slacks, and light blue shirt. He'd searched all over Westbury Mall until he'd found one with small gray horses on a field of dark blue. Page 171. I think it's cute that Evan ran around and bought a horse-themed tie for the dinner party held by the evil horse lady. This'll impress her for sure, buddy. Except it doesn't. He'd seen Drago's eyes flicker briefly down to his tie, narrow just a fraction, then move back to his face. Page 172. Yikes. Sorry, dude. It wasn't exactly subtle. At the party, Evan encounters the husband of one of his neighbors for the first time, and once more is jump-scared by the sight of a disabled person. It was then that Evan realized, with an icy rush through his veins, that the sleeve of David Giles's right arm was pinned up just below the elbow. He stared at that sleeve for a few seconds dumbly, hearing his heart beat within him like a distant pagan drum of warning. Page 175. As Evan overtly gawks at Mr. Giles, Mrs. Giles answers the question of where the name Bethany Sin came from. In the 1950s, a man named George Bethany operated a brothel in the rural farmland that became this idyllic town. The name stuck, though residents are apparently trying to change it. One would think the time for changing the name would have been when the town was very recently founded, but there's no point in questioning the story. It is revealed to be later, of course, a lie. They encounter one of Kay's co-workers, a man named Blackburn. He begins to discuss Artemis and the town's history museum, but Catherine interrupts. They bicker, alluding to a disagreement about Catherine's work. As they argue, the women in the room gather close with a shared look of hatred, and Kay is suddenly overwhelmed with an urge to snap Blackburn's neck. But the tension shatters as Catherine drops a glass and the party ends. Mrs. DeMargian was babysitting Laurie, and Evan notices as they get home that she's given their daughter a toy bow and arrow. This causes him to freak out, yelling at their neighbor and breaking the toy. Once more, Evan gets to play the part of a hysterical spouse, a real win for gender equality. Evan worries he's being paranoid and imagining things, going down a spiral caused by his PTSD, but it's hard for that to hit as a theme when we know his suspicions and nightmares are correct. He simply has yet to encounter any evidence to prove it. Evan then visits the Historical Society at last, learning the artifacts inside are all from the excavation seen in the prologue, revealed to be of Themyscira. If you hadn't guessed by now, this confirms the cult of evil women are specifically Amazons, this ancient Greek town supposedly being the capital of the Amazons in Greek mythology. The museum has a mysterious locked room upstairs, but nothing else of note. We also learn what caused Catherine's anger at the party. She believes Amazons were real, while Blackburn disputes her evidence. As the book edges towards its climax, the rest of the mystery unfolds across scattered conversations between Evan and other men. Kay's nightmares grow increasingly violent until one night she wakes up in a trance and attempts to murder Evan. He fights her off and takes her to the clinic where she just remains for the last section of the book. As female characters go, Kay is alright, she's a reasonable, normal woman dealing with her husband's mental health crisis and life in a new town. In books like this, I feel like I'm always thinking that the main characters need to get a divorce, and I didn't think that they needed a divorce, so that's a real mark of standard for this woman and this relationship. I appreciated getting her perspective, but Evan was always and has always been the main character. Kay barely notices the oddities of Bethany Sin and never actually moves the plot along, except at the end where she's a victim. I'm not sure what to make of the role of gender in this book, where the main horror is so gendered. Ultimately, the book never aspires any higher than this is a cult of man-hating Amazons, and that's a good thing. There doesn't seem to be any message about the danger of giving women rights, that this is what all unmarried women dream of. This is the story about a bunch of axe-wielding ghosts on horseback. It's shock horror, and it makes seeking a deeper feminist reading feel a bit silly. Still, there's always some surface-level analysis. Women aren't treated well by the book, in that Kay ultimately has little agency or impact, and all the side women characters are just secretly evil ghosts. Women aren't treated badly by the book either, in that the evil at hand is clearly because of evil ghosts, not the women themselves. These guys are just very angry ghosts. It's rather like the issues around ableism. It's both excused by weird loopholes, but nevertheless present. Kay is left at the hospital, and the plot unfolds without her. Neely discovers human teeth at the landfill and tells Evan. We also learn in a far too detailed scene that Neely is drugged most nights and sexually assaulted by women. The fact that they all lack their right breast is treated as far more shocking than the rape, which is played more for titillation. Blackburn isn't killed by Catherine for his insolence, and after some scheduling issues, Evan meets with him to learn more about Amazons, including the fact they supposedly would cut off their right breasts, kill all male babies born in the tribe, and also cut off the limbs of male prisoners to use them as breeding slaves. After having a vision of Kay cutting off his legs in the hospital, Evan grows certain the threat he senses in the town is indeed the Amazons. Despite this suspicion, he doesn't check his wife out from the clinic or take his daughter somewhere else. He calls up Neely in the middle of the night to help him dig up the landfill, and we get this fantastic bit of discussion on the subject. Evan started to touch the tooth fragment Neely held, then withdrew his hand. Where did you find those? That's what's so strange. The landfill. He turned his gaze toward Evan. Now what in God's name are human teeth doing lying around in the landfill? No, Evan said, his voice hollow. You're wrong. About what? I don't think God has anything to do with it. Neely's eyes narrowed. What? Nothing. I'm just thinking out loud. Page 226. He begins looking for human remains as Neely keeps watch. The sound of hoofbeats grows as the Amazons close in. Evan then strikes bone jackpot, discovering an immense horde of corpses in various states of decay, including a large number of dead infants. At this moment, the Amazons arrive, killing Neely instantly. The Amazons stop to speak with Evan and fill us in on the true history of Bethany Sin. Back in the 50s, a girl named Bethany lived on a farm with her mother and abusive father. Her mother would read to her about the Amazons. One day, her father killed her mother, so Bethany stabbed her father to death. For this, the area became known as Bethany Sin. The girl was sent to live with family in Greece, later returning as Catherine Drago. Great. After the Amazons' exposition break, Evan simply runs away, and so begins the silly little climax of the book. Evan scurries through the woods, hiding from the ghosts on horseback and citizens of Bethany Sin. He takes shelter in Mrs. DeMargian's basement and kills her when she discovers him there. He overhears Kay is going to undergo the rite of iron and fire. He builds several Molotov cocktails and firebombs horses as he runs through the town in search of his wife and child. He encounters Sheriff Wissinger, who plans to turn him into the Amazons. So Evan crashes the sheriff's car with both of them in it into a gas station. Evan somehow survives the fireball, but the sheriff does not. At last he comes to the History Museum. Certain Kay will be in the one room he was forbidden from visiting, up on the top floor. He ascends the roof and peers in through a convenient skylight. Kay is indeed lying on a ritual slab, surrounded by women, as Catherine prepares to remove her breast with an ancient mastectomy tool. One statue in the room stands out, of Artemis covered in breasts. I thought that the author was conflating two statues, but he's actually referring to a real statue, Artemis of Artemis of Ephesus. This is the statue Catherine fell in front of in the prologue, causing hundreds of Amazon ghosts to enter her body. For the rest of the book and since then, she's just been, I suppose, releasing ghosts to take over random women in her vicinity. That's what's been happening. Evan crashes through the skylight and firebombs the place. Catherine yells for the other women to leave, and they take Kay with them. Evan and Catherine then fight until Evan shoves her onto a sword one of the statues is wielding. She grabs hold of him, stabbing him on the same blade, and both of them die as fire overtakes the museum. Because, yes, Evan dies. It's the one surprise I didn't anticipate, but it isn't also, quite enough of anything to matter. It's unexpected, but it's also the end of the book. His death doesn't change or add much to the book beyond a closing note. We return to Kay's point of view, and she has no memory of what occurred, and very sparse memory of the last few weeks. Due to a particularly bad drought, Evan's firebombs burned down the majority of Bethany Sin. Most people either died or disappeared. The sheriff's scrapbook of local murders was discovered, as was the landfill, but authorities lack any clear answers as to what went down. In the end, Kay drives away with Lori, both of them freshly traumatized. The end. What a story. At the end of it all, Bethany Sin is what it is. That's where my thoughts keep ending up. If you're not familiar with pulp horror that looks like this, trade paperbacks found in charity shops, with authors and titles you've never heard of, this is what they're like. Bethany Sin is, despite its name and cover, fairly tame compared to its cohorts. The plot functions at each step with some amount of theme and character development, but never more than a book like it needs. First and foremost, this is about a bunch of evil ghosts hunting men for the hell of it, and the one man who murdered his way to victory. I had a good time reading it, and that's that. I find myself at a loss for words because I think I've said every word I need to on the subject. Boy, that sure was a sin, Bethany.